Crowd control plays a key role in every single game of League. Chances are in any standard 5v5 match, there's going to be at least one crowd control ability that both teams will be playing around, if not a few or a dozen. It's not unlikely for the most threatening elements of a team to be their means of disabling the enemy, and there are so many different types. Blind, cripple, disarm, disrupt, drowsy, and by extension sleep, berserk, charm, fear, taunt, ground, knockdown, nearsight, root, silence, polymorph, slow, stasis, stun, and suppress. Among all of them, one of the most dominant groups of crowd control in the game is displacement crowd control, more collectively known as Knockups or the airborne status. Knockup CC has a lot of unique attributes to it that are different from others, resulting in them following different rules and having different implications than other crowd control abilities, often exempting them from conventional forms of counterplay too. It also happens to be arguably the most common form of crowd control in the game, not counting slows of course. With how influential they are in League, I want to talk about them in more detail and elaborate on why they're so powerful. So for the next mechanics discussion episode, we'll be discussing displacement crowd control. Like all mechanics, we should go over what they are, what they do, and how they interface with other mechanics. The wiki describes it as such. A unit that's knocked airborne is made so alongside undergoing a forced displacement in a specified direction to a specific point, or for a set duration at its current location, during which it's also unable to control its movement, declare attacks, cast abilities, activate items, or use the summoner spells, flash, and teleport. In other words, the airborne status is for all intents and purposes a stun, but with an added layer on top. Most of you watching this know the key distinction between a stun and displacement is that you can't lessen the duration or get rid of it altogether, or so we think. See, technically, a displacement is made up of two components, a movement modifier and the airborne status itself, which is responsible for disabling the unit's actions. It's commonly agreed upon that buying Merc Treads is pointless against knockups, and likewise items like Mikhail's Blessing, QSS, or spells like Melio's Breath of Life or Cleanse cannot stop you from being knocked up, knocked away, and such. This is one of the reasons people believe knockups to be overpowered. Supposedly, knockups are immune to any crowd control mitigating effects. To an extent, that is true. The universal stat that counteracts crowd control is Tenacity, reducing the duration of all incoming disables with the exception of drowsy, nearsight, stasis, suppression, and last but not least, airborne, which is why people think knockups can't be cleansed. But they actually can be, or rather, the part that prevents you from doing anything can be. The force movement modifier is actually what moves you from point A to point B. For example, when Blitzcrank lands a hook on you, the spot from where you're standing to the spot on top of him is the distance you move. But any good Ezreal player is aware that you can negate Rocket Grab's forced movement by buffering Arcane Shift. How this works is that during the obligatory 0.25 second cast time that's on most abilities, by buffering Arcane Shift in the split second before you get hooked, the force movement from Arcane Shift overrides the force movement from Rocket Grab, thus allowing Ezreal to avoid being hooked, but it doesn't cleanse the stun part of it, hence why you're still stunned for a brief moment afterwards. This is also why in virtually every skill description on a displacement ability it often says that it stuns the target while knocking them up. Sion's Decimating Smash is a 1 second knockup accompanied by a 2.5 second stun, both of which occur at the same time. Reason for this is that if Sion's Q was a 2.25 second knockup, that would probably look really visually awkward, so in the case of Sion's Q, Tenacity is useful since it may not mitigate the knockup, but it will mitigate the stun that goes with it. This means that on paper, a champion can act while being forcibly displaced, so long as an overriding component is added. The easiest way to demonstrate this is with Gangplank's Remove Scurvy. Those oranges are still unable to stop him from being forcibly displaced. If he gets Malphite ultimate and uses W, he can then either flash to override the knockup movement or cast his other abilities and attack while he waits to stop bungee jumping. This extends to other all-purpose cleansing effects like QSS. In fact, Project Omen made a very handy video demonstrating this. Notice how once Lee Sin's knocked up, he uses QSS, which then allows him to safeguard to a minion. Likewise, when Lee kicks Yasuo, he can QSS it and then use Sweeping Blade to override the knockback. Sorry if I'm getting too nerdy about this, none of this really pertains to the question of whether they're overpowered or not. I just thought it was fascinating that you technically can cleanse displacement, it's just more convoluted than other stuns because you have to override the immobilization part and then override the force movement, both of which are different. It's the same mechanic that responds to knockdown abilities like Malzahar's Nethergrasp or Vex's Doom and Gloom. That's how they can stop dashes. They stop the force movement part with the knockdown and then apply an immobilizing debuff after. If they only apply the fear, suppress, whatever, their target will still reach their intended destination, which is why even if you Morgana bind a Lee Sin Q after he dashes, he will still reach the final spot because Dark Binding has no accompanying effect that overrides the force movement associated with Lee's dash. It just stops him from doing anything afterwards. One last thing, if you're wondering why they designed Airborne this way, two reasons. First, that's how you have different dashing and displacement speeds. A very slow dash like Gragas' Body Slam compared to an extremely fast dash like Irelia. Both of those are governed by the force movement parameter. Conversely, a slow displacement like Lee's Dragon Rage compared to a fast displacement like Alistar's Headbutt. Second, it's so that tenacity, or lack thereof, does actually matter. You guys know Ornn's brittle mechanic, right? And how on top of dealing max health damage, it increases crowd control duration by 30%. What it actually does is reduce tenacity by 30%. So, if for instance you have Merc Treads, getting hit by a Morgana Q while your brittle is active will cause you to take the full 3-second duration instead of the 2.1 you were expected to. This allows Ornn's brittle to still affect displacement crowd control, as it prolongs the stun duration without lengthening the forced movement, since if it did, that could result in a myriad of really strange interactions that Vanderul will probably have a great time making videos on. Okay, so now that we've gone through just about everything there is to know about knockups, let's finally address the video's title. Why are they so overpowered? Based on what we established up until now and evaluating them against other forms of crowd control, the short answer is that the reason knockups are so overpowered is because, alongside suppress, they're the only form of hard crowd control that cannot be mitigated through conventional means. And though it is possible, doing so is highly impractical and will cost more resources than is worthwhile. It stands to reason that a 1-second knockup is far better than a 1-second stun, despite both of them inhibiting enemy movement and actions. But then of course you came here for the long answer. The thing that makes disruption crowd control so powerful is that unlike any other hard CC, it imposes forced movement on the opponent, thereby overriding any existing movement taking place. As mentioned with knockdowns, disruptions are most valuable for their ability to interrupt any champion's dash abilities and the effects accompanying them and forcibly adjust an enemy champion's position against their will, in turn making them potentially some of the best abilities in the game for having offensive and defensive properties, both from a practical and psychological perspective. A hypothetical that demonstrates either aspect at the same time would be the classic Alistar counterpick against any hook type support. Alistar is viewed as the counterpick versus Blitzcrank, Nautilus, Pike, and such on account of turning their own engage against them. Having two very powerful displacement crowd controls that can be used interchangeably, Alistar is the last person you want to engage on. If Blitzcrank were to pull Ali right into their team, that saves them the trouble of burning headbutt to gap close, meaning he can open with Pulverize on Blitz's team if they're standing too close to him, enabling Alistar's team a chance to counter-engage on an otherwise unfavorable situation. Conversely, Alistar can Pulverize, then insect a baddie into his team with headbutt, allowing for an easy kill. Seldom is it a good idea to pull Alistar closer to your team because that's exactly what he wants. But even if you thread the needle and land a hook on his teammate, provided you're not landing a max range pull, Alistar can just punt away your carry, putting you in a bad position either way. So in this scenario, his displacement acts as an offensive deterrent. He wants you to engage on him or his teammate in order to achieve a favorable outcome. Now let's assume Blitzcrank's teammate is Samira, someone who likes to dash in to get up close and personal. With Alistar in place, Samira may not be as enthusiastic about going in since the moment she does, he can knock her away, resetting back to neutral. This by extension affects any possible engage. If you try to fight Lee Sin, he can simply just kick you away, disincentivizing you from engaging on him unless you know it's on cooldown or he's outnumbered. Either way, the very presence of a displacement tool can be enough to discourage someone from attacking outside of positions where they have a guaranteed chance of success. What's more, even the slightest bit of interruption is enough to have significant consequences. While many consider Thresh's death sentence to be the keystone of his moveset, I actually consider Flay to be the more consequential ability. Given that he can use it forward or backwards, it can be a peel tool or a semi-pull. Whichever the application, Flay is an extremely dangerous ability. All it does is briefly knock enemies in the direction he's sweeping his chain, followed by short-lasting slow, but realistically, that's all he needs. As mentioned earlier, displacement crowd control overrides any existing movement taking place and the effects accompanying them. If timed correctly, Flay can be used to interrupt critical movement effects. He can snipe a Tristana mid-rocket jump, stop a Zac from slingshotting into his team, thereby cancelling the AoE knockup that follows. He can disrupt Rel's Pharamezi Crashdown, totally denying her allied Yasuo from executing a massive, possibly game-winning combo. He can stop a Pantheon mid-jump from stunning his ADC, effectively destroying all of his pressure. That's what makes him so powerful. Even a knockup that lasts a mere picosecond is enough to cancel entire abilities, the likes of which a stun, root, silence, etc. cannot. This is even more noticeable when we talk about contact disruption or instant disruption. Janna's Howling Gale is arguably the best at underscoring this. Take everything I said about Thresh's Flay and apply it here. Only difference is it can be activated immediately. Janna's Howling Gale, and I suppose by extension Monsoon, makes her one of the hardest champions to engage on, as she has two instant get off me tools. Ideally, you want to charge up her Q for a longer knockup and farther travel distance, but you can simply hold your Q and on reaction you can stop Rengar's jump, Wukong's dash, Meganar's crunch, Yonna's third Q, all that stuff, and it bears repeating that cancelling dash abilities cancels the rest of their pressure as a result. Without Yonna's third Q, he doesn't have a guaranteed setup for his ultimate. Without Rel's engage, she's completely useless. Contact disruption is even better when the champion themselves is the displacement. Abilities like Body Slam, Powerball, Arctic Assault, and Vault Breaker are major threats for the simple reason that they cannot be challenged. If Lee Sin throws a Q on Rammus and dashes towards him, Rammus can simply press Q and Lee cancels his own dash. That is, unless of course he ward hops mid-dash. When Gragas uses Body Slam, if you dash into him during that time, you're gonna lose while getting damage yourself. Like Janna's Tornado, these abilities are also instant cast. What makes them better though is that not only can they be used offensively, but they remove the onus of having to aim them. It's one of the reasons why, for example, Poppy's one of Riven's hardest counters. She can activate Steadfast Presence or Heroic Charge to stop her third Q on reaction, unless Riven stuns her first key strike. For the former, Poppy doesn't even have to aim it, she just waits until she sees Riven's Q animation or Camille's hookshot dash or anything and it's an instant cancel. The other aspect that makes Knockup so good is the force repositioning, which can make a 1 second or even half a second displacement better than a 3-second route. These days, Lee Sin's ability to send an enemy teammate towards your team and away from theirs, a technique that's been named after its inventor, Insect, is part of what makes him such a versatile and popular jungler. Though Dragon Rage only practically stuns a target for about a second, more often than not, it's far better than a 2-second stun or even 3. For stuns, roots, or even suppression, what gives him a comparatively longer duration is the time you're expected to take just to get within range of attacking them. Morgana's Dark Binding is a 3-second route, one of the longest in the game, but assuming you're landing it from a fair distance, a good second or two is burned just getting in range of the rooted target. Additionally, if they got struck near their team, said teammates have some agency in protecting them, such as the aforementioned abilities like Janna's Howling Gale or Monsoon. Or in a more straightforward manner, they can spam shields and heals on their caught out teammate until the effect wears off, or say they have Cleanse or the support is Mikhail's, that erases the problem altogether. You don't exactly have those same avenues of escape if you're being displaced though. If you get pulled or knocked away from the safety of your team, they can't help you without risking their own life. Say you get rooted by a max range Morgana Q. It might still result in your imminent death, especially in the late game where everyone gets one-shotted, but at the very least, if you don't have a cleanse, your team can take some measures to buy just enough time for you to escape with your life. Whatever form that takes, peel tools like Alistar, healing like Soraka, zoning crowd control like Granada ult, or even cover fire if you have a Xerath or Ziggs on your team, the onus ultimately falls on Morgana and her team to walk up and kick your ass. However, if you get pulled by a Blitzcrank or Nautilus, the onus is on your team to reenact Saving Private Ryan and come rescue you, which, empirically, is significantly more hazardous. Even if on the off chance they do make the ill-advised choice to try and save you, 9 times out of 10 you're fighting in a disadvantageous position. I know I said earlier in the video that if you're playing someone like Alistar, you almost want to get pulled towards the enemy team so you can engage and wreak havoc on everything, but that's only if your team is ready to follow up on it. An Alistar caught out is still an Alistar caught out. He's completely useless on his own. There are just a lot more factors you have to consider when looking at knockups and displacements compared to more straightforward crowd control like stuns and roots. Not to imply that stuns and roots are bad, any crowd control is better than no crowd control, but the added layers nested within displacement are why I believe they're the best form of crowd control in the game. Honestly, even more than suppress. Now there is one downside to this type of CC, in that there's a chance it can backfire. When you stun or root an enemy target, that's only ever a positive thing. Worst case scenario, they can't do anything for a while. Best case scenario, they die. For displacement, since they forcibly reposition enemies, that can lead to the unintended consequence of missing certain abilities, particularly your teammates' missing abilities, if they don't anticipate the displacement in question. This does in fact apply to knockups as well. Despite sending an enemy champion directly upwards, knockups don't exactly keep them in the same place. See for yourself, go on practice tool and use any knockup on a group of target dummies. They don't always land in the same spot they were before, often shifting ever so slightly, but that can make the difference between landing critical abilities. A more obvious example would be something like using Draven's stand aside to knock someone away, which causes the Pike support to miss Bone Skewer because he was aiming at the original spot before Draven knocked the enemy aside. The most famous example would be Gragas, whose explosive cask is notorious for accidentally saving low health enemies if they get knocked away instead of towards you, so knockups are by no means infallible, they come with their own risks. Even so, I still regard them as the best form of crowd control in the game. But what do you guys think? Do you agree or disagree with that statement? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope this was insightful to those who needed it and entertaining to those who wanted it. If you guys enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other mechanics discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.